Hello, I'm Hanne.
And I'm Tom. Welcome to the Digital Behaviour Podcast, a podcast about human behaviour in the digital world.
In this podcast, we help you understand what drives online behaviour, how we can measure this, and the impact on the wider world.
Today, we're going to be meeting James Vincent, digital marketing consultant, but also a PhD researcher. And we're going to be discussing his views on AI and marketing. But before introducing James, let's have a look at a couple of pieces of current research in this area. Okay, so I spotted an interesting paper. This isn't specifically about AI, it's about virtual influencers. And of course, virtual influencers, I imagine, are going to become AI generated, if not already. And this particular research was in the Journal of Advertising. It was published by Chen Liu and various other people alongside. And it was looking at the impact of virtual influencers in marketing. It was a piece of research that was generated through interviews, I think about 26 interviews, I think it was, all about how people perceive virtual influencers, and there were people who follow virtual influencers. And for example, there is one particular example of a famous virtual influencer, someone called Lil Michaela, I think her name is, and she's got about 3 million followers on Instagram. And this particular influencer, as an example, this isn't necessarily the one that everyone was talking about in the research, but this particular influencer has been sponsored by various big brands. I think BMW was one of them. And basically everyone knows that this is not a real person. And it's just interesting to see that actually a character that people know isn't actually real can still generate a big following, 3 million people. And there are various reasons that the research uncovered as to why they do that. One is that people are looking for information about new technology, so they understand that this has been generated through computers, and they want to actually see what's possible through computer generation. Some people just find it entertaining, so they know it's going to bring them information about brands, and they find that interesting. And some people just, want to track what influencers are saying generally, so they feel like they're on trend and they're staying in the know. Some people like the aesthetics of it, and her posts, particularly Lil Michaela's posts, tend to be quite colourful. I think the BMW one had a bright red car. I think she might have been wearing red clothes as well. So the aesthetics are quite a key part of why these Instagram posts are important. And the last point as to why people said they follow virtual influencers was that they actually like being part of a crowd of people who are following virtual influencers. They want to be socially integrated with a crowd of people who are doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, I started following her, I think last year actually, or the year before, just out of curiosity as well, because as a user, I did find it really interesting to see what sort of virtual influencer would put out there in terms of posts, why so many people are actually interested. And I can kind of see it again as a user, from a sort of more of a researcher, having a researcher hat on is, again, very interesting to try to understand consumers and how, they perceive seeing a person that is clearly an avatar, it's not a real person, how that impacts, their buying behavior. One paper I've looked at, and it's kind of in line, in line with what we've just talked about, is the fact that there are more and more AI generated people on the internet generally, and this paper in particular is by Miller et al. In 2023, so very recent, actually, end of 2023, and it's in psychological science. But what they found is that we can't sort of determine between real human faces and AI-generated faces, And I think if we look at Michaela as an example, this virtual influencer, there seems to be a bit of a shift from, really companies wanting to make it distinguishable, with a virtual influencer. I know it's not, necessarily the same, but it does, I think, show quite an interesting shift towards, having it very clear this is, not a real person, compared to now using AI-generated pictures and AI-generated profiles of people, using them in lots of different campaigns, actually, people that really do not exist. And this particular paper looks at in how far we, or humans, can determine whether somebody is AI-generated or whether it's a real human, a real person. And they actually found, I thought that was super interesting, this was based on 2 quite large-scale experiments. One was 124 people. The other one was actually 610 adults, so quite a lot of large studies. But they found that, first of all, we can't distinguish between AI-generated people and actual humans. And if anything, at least in that experiment, we thought mostly that AI generated people are real more so than the actual humans. So they call it hyperrealism, that we actually couldn't distinguish. But if anything, we judge the AI-generated ones more human-like than the actual humans.
And just to bring the conversation full circle, that first paper I was talking about, the Journal of Advertising one, actually found, well, it presented an old theory, which I've never heard of before, called the uncanny valley theory, which basically says when we know that something is artificially generated, but it looks real, we find that creepy. But actually it found that with someone like Lil Michaela and other virtual influencers, avatars, that actually the fact that we know it's not real mitigates the fact that it's creepy. So we see curated flaws. For example, we know that the human behind Lil Michaela is deliberately put flaws in, and the fact that we know that there are people behind the avatar make it seem less creepy. That I guess the original uncanny valley theory might apply more to things like mannequins, I guess. Back in the 1970s when it first was developed, that particular theory, and now when we see the equivalent of mannequins, we see online characters, we actually we don't find them creepy in the same way. But I mean, the important thing is for marketers anyway that this doesn't seem to drive purchases. So although we see sponsored brands or brands sponsoring the avatar, and it seems to increase brand awareness, because it would. There's 3 million people that now know about this new BMW car that didn't know about it before. But actually, that doesn't seem to actually make people want to go out and buy whichever product it is that is sponsoring at that particular moment.
And I do wonder whether, creepiness is maybe not the right word, but I do wonder how much that is at play as well, because if after reading this article, I've looked at some bit deeper into sort of AI-generated faces, and those now where we really can't distinguish. It is quite creepy, and it is quite shocking to see how there's this one website called thisisnotaperson.com, I think, is called. thispersondoesn'texist.com, which is signed in this particular paper. But you can just, it's all the AI-generated faces, and I couldn't distinguish at all, if anything. In the study, they found that if somebody was too perfectly looking, for example, like very attractive, that made them believe it's not human and needs to be AI, or need to be AI generated. But I do wonder this, creepiness, or, if it does get too close to home, and if we say it's ourselves, we just don't know anymore what's real, what isn't, and how far that can impact our purchase behavior, I guess. But I also, this is just a thought that wasn't necessarily picked up as much in the paper, but there's also a lot of questions around the ethics, and using AI in marketing, which we will cover maybe later a little bit more in more detail. But some really interesting findings are there.
Yeah, another point actually, which is briefly touched on, I think, certainly in the abstract of that paper you're mentioning, Hannah, is that the faces they were using were white, because a lot of AI trainers are, or I don't mean actual people, but the algorithms are using white faces to build the faces they're creating. So that's also an ethical issue as well. And I know there's been a wider debate around any information that AI models are built on is then going to help the generation tool to create similar materials. So in this case, it's faces, but it could be other sorts of information. I guess if it basically is only as good as the information it relies on, and if that happens to be white faces, then it's going to be really good at making white faces, but perhaps not so good at a huge number of people in the world don't have a white face, so it's not going to be quite as good at representing them, perhaps.
No, absolutely. And even, gender biases itself, even among sort of white people, there seems to be a tendency of AI being better equipped to, have white male faces rather than female faces, and then when it comes to other race and gender, there's lots of sort of, aspects that are just seem biased in one way or another, which is something that needs definitely more unpacking as we go along, I would say.
Yeah. Well, let's take a pause. I know that ethics is something that James is very keen on, and some of you may have already seen his TEDx talk on YouTube, which we'll touch on. It also refers back to ethics. So this conversation will continue in a couple of minutes. Hello, James, and thank you very much for joining us. Now, obviously, I know you well, and you're a PhD student here at the University of West of England in the business school where I teach and research. But could you tell us a little bit about your background? In particular, I know that you run a digital marketing consultancy nearby in Bath called Hot Sauce. maybe you could tell us about that and how that's led you to where you are today.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for having me on board here today. So we've ran Hot Sauce for around 7 years now. What originally started as a creative agency back in the day has very quickly evolved into an award-winning digital marketing agency. We specialize very much working with companies all around the world with predominantly looking and improving their digital presence in one form or another. We worked with a lot of companies, everybody from airlines all the way to, very much startups, councils, government, and everybody in between. In the last few years, though, we've started to specialize more in anything in education. A lot of the work that we're doing at the moment actually is in line with schools, councils, government, and universities, where we're actually helping them understand next generation marketing and helping them predict and understand how this can be used for students, organizations, companies, and so forth.
And are there any particular tools? Obviously, digital marketing is a huge business. Are there any particular areas of digital marketing that you're particularly skilled in or particularly expert in?
I'd like to say that as an agency like ourselves, to say that you know everything is impossible. We're always learning and always trying to test new things every day. A lot of the work that we're getting in at the moment would be either training, social media, or strategy development. A lot of the work we've been doing in 2024, it's again shifted every single year, but 2024 so far this year, most of our work has been coming from either social media or training, which is very, very interesting. We work with a lot of companies that feel like they want a digital presence, but don't know how to use it properly, and also want to be trained on how to do this themselves, which is quite interesting.
James, welcome to the podcast. It's very nice to meet you. And just as a follow-up there, when you say in education, do you mean you look at how to present sort of schools or universities on social media, or what's sort of your focus when it comes to educational institutes?
So, for example, we've been hired quite a lot over the last few years where we come in and either, for example, I'll give you a case study here. We were hired by a local bid in the Midlands area where they said, look, we represent a group of something like 26 businesses and they don't understand how to use marketing. They're growing and they've got a presence that is physical. How do they utilize digital? And so what we did is we came along and created them a custom training course that taught them how to very much adapt to the digital age and use digital tools and techniques to have their business represented online. So there's one example more on a business focus. As well as that, we're also being hired either by universities or, for example, education groups, where we're coming along and creating courses that will either be implemented for teachers, lecturers, or even students themselves where they need something brand new.
I also know you've got a particular interest in sort of AI, artificial intelligence, and marketing or marketeers in general. And I know, especially with the last 2 years, our listeners will probably have heard of ChatGPT and some of the more, common ways of how artificial intelligence, especially generative artificial intelligence, has been sort of come into our lives. What would you say is how can marketers currently use AI? Is there something that you would recommend or that you see happening for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a lot of different changes over the last few years with programs being developed, very much on the back of the buzz of ChatGPT. However, for example, as an agency like ourselves, we're using 2 particular programs at the moment. One of them is called HeyGen, and the other one is called 11 Labs. And they are designed for voice cloning and human cloning. So what we're trying to do at the moment is we're trying to see, could we in theory create avatars of individuals within companies or ourselves? And in addition to that, we've also been investigating voice cloning quite a lot. So for example, understanding, could we in theory replicate a individual's voice if they needed a spokesperson for either content creation or websites or so forth. This is something we've been doing a lot privately. On the back of that, though, we've also been testing, which was something that I investigated within my TED Talk, actually understanding, which you represented yourself as well, about ethics and influencers, looking into the idea of cloning in the darker side of things, for example, scams and deepfakes. We've also been investigating how could companies sort of either be a victim of this or use this for a positive. In addition to that, other programs that are becoming quite popular, what we're starting to see now is a lot of larger companies that are more equipped to adapt to AI. They're starting to use AI programs for predictive analysis and consumer behavior. One of the problems that we had in the world of marketing, we've had it for 7 years privately and before when I was working within agencies, is there was always this statement around marketing where there was this element of smoke and mirrors. Does it work? Does it really work, marketing? Does social media really work? Where did the sales really come from? And what we're starting to see now is that with artificial intelligence, that sort of smoke and mirrors has been taken out. It is all going down to numbers and data, which in theory is a massive help because it's not fanciful anymore. Instead of saying, well, we ran this ad and we hope for the best and we think this is your audience and your market, we're now seeing that companies are using AI to actually fine-tune answers that can help benefit them properly for growth, which is quite interesting.
Do you think there's any legitimate space for use of AI? I mean, obviously there are ethical concerns by people that are using it to scam people. But if there is a marketing team, a business, an agency that is using AI to generate content, but there's no scam, there's no nothing illegal about what they're doing. Do you see AI as being a useful tool? I mean, particularly if you mentioned the voice generation, for example. If you could, with your spokesperson's agreement, if you could create clips of them, audio clips, maybe one day video clips that involved that spokesperson but didn't actually require them to come to a studio and film it or record it, would that be that could be useful? Presumably you could save the cost of getting them in a car to come to a studio, and you could just, with their permission, you could still use them in your content, couldn't you? That would be a positive thing.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. There are massive positive implications of AI that can be used for businesses, definitely. And to say that there wouldn't be is naive, because inevitably, this is a tool that was designed to be good. To an element, I'm going to put there in inverted commas, it was designed to be good. And, there are massive benefits for companies using AI only if they understand how to use it properly. That's the problem that I'm starting to see here. So, for example, we were working with a company quite recently who turned around and said, well, we don't need a strategy written anymore. We have ChatGPT. And so what happened as a result of that is this company, a small organization, but still with a budget and growth behind them, decided to use AI as a replacement to intelligence. And as a result of that, what they were presented with was a fanciful strategy. And the problem was that what they needed was training on how to use these programs properly to get the information that could benefit them. Otherwise, what's happening is you are seeing companies use AI without the legitimate understanding of how powerful they could be, and it's actually hindering their business growth as a result.
Yeah, so it's the prompts that are important, knowing what to put in order to get something meaningful out. There's a company, I won't name them because they don't want to be named. There's a company I know of in Bristol, and I think you may know them as well, James, who are producing marketing content through AI. And I think they're actually sending out marketing content that's AI generated. And they're finding it a really efficient way to put out marketing content, because you don't need to design lots of different things with a person actually sitting at a desk designing things. You can send out lots of different content, and hopefully, the AI tool itself will discover what works and what doesn't work. And if it drives leads, if it gets people to click on a link that they see online somewhere, then it's a really effective way. It's a cost-effective way of generating lots of content very quickly, and quickly finding out what works, rather than in the old days, trying different adverts, A/B testing things, and doing it manually. You've got an AI tool that can do it, without having to waste that time. I did notice though in your talk, your TEDx talk, that you were talking about. I think it used the example of families having to use safe words so that you could identify, whether a phone call was a scam phone call or not, whether it's actually your son or your dad, whoever it might be that's phoning. And I have heard some discussion of this in a wider context, whether we should actually be labeling that content which is AI generated, so we all know, okay, this is really, Lil Michaela, for example, okay, she's not AI, she's virtual, but I don't think she's actually AI generated. But it won't be long before that kind of influencer is AI generated, and should there be some label on it that makes us know that that is not actually generated by a real person?
I believe so, yes. The problem that I have with AI at the moment is misinformation, which is becoming a problem globally. I've seen this firsthand. I've seen it today, I saw it yesterday, and I'll see it tomorrow. Misinformation is everywhere at the moment. We saw a skyrocket of misinformation with the development of the internet, and then with the extended development of social media. And we're seeing another round of that now. What we're starting to see is companies implement certain parameters to showcase to audiences that, yes, this is AI generated. For example, TikTok is one of them. If you are uploading AI generated content, you have to label that. However, the problem is the content is being mass produced, that there are no protection or parameters into place to protect that. We saw this a number of times with social media. For example, I think it was France who developed it. I may be incorrect stating this, but France was one of the first to develop a principle that if a photo, particularly models, had been altered in any way, they had to represent on the photo that it had been changed, so that there were no repercussions with body issues or so forth. They could state that this image had been altered. Adobe was also another program that actually developed a parameter that I could actually protect an individual to say that whatever they uploaded was altered as well in some way, shape, or form, and it would start stating this. I believe that you will start to see that exact same principle with AI as well. That there will be most avenues that will have some sort of alignment to say this has either been edited, altered, or supported with AI. And I think that is a good thing for the future, especially with what we're seeing now with misinformation.
James, I'm actually currently writing a book chapter on the ethical implication of artificial intelligence in marketing. And I've sort of started doing quite a bit of research around that, and some of the things we've talked about already or covered, which is really the misinformation, which is part of sort of earlier research that I've done as well, in particular when it comes to artificial intelligence, not just necessarily generative artificial intelligence, but also, other forms on social media. When it comes to how we see our feeds, how we perceive our feed, and what's been shown to us in terms of news and stuff. Other things I've come across was the algorithmic bias and fairness that we've talked about earlier, or Tom and I brushed on as well. What would you say when it comes to sort of, fairness and equity as well for equality? For marketeers, what is something that businesses need to really consider or, take into consideration in order to try to ensure that, they don't, treat any of their consumers, differently based on such algorithmic bias? How can they ensure that they do formulate, whether it's content, for example, or other bits of information, that they ensure that it is sort of inclusive to everyone? Is there anything they can do, or are we currently just not ready yet to be able to ensure that?
You still need the human at this current moment in time, because what we've seen over the last, especially 6 months, is that these programs are still evolving, and they're not perfect, not in any way, shape, or form. We're seeing, massive implication problems with, for example, we saw this just on the news 2 days ago with Gemini, with Google. We saw problems. We've seen problems with ChatGPT. We've seen problems with most AI programs. And what's happening, in my opinion, is that we are already starting to use AI as a crutch, where we are using AI to reply to emails, create content, create strategies, create imagery, whatever that may be, without really understanding what we have created. For example, as lecturers yourself and myself, I have seen firsthand where people have submitted information without reading it. Content that has been created without really understanding what you've done, a paper that has been, looked at. There are so many problems. I've even seen firsthand people reply to me with emails where it actually say at the bottom, this, like a statement from ChatGPT saying this was created in line with the prompts that you gave, because we're already having it as a crutch where we are becoming lazy without really understanding the implications of what we're doing. And I've seen this happen multiple times, and it's very interesting. I actually ran a case study with a number of my students on a boot camp about 6 months ago, where we were learning and teaching AI, and I ran with them. I didn't tell them I was doing this, but I basically replied to every email for a week using AI. And what I said to myself, and what I was doing was I was running sort of a trial test, and only one student found out that I was using AI because they said, this doesn't sound like you, and you've used the word enigmatic like something like 6 times in the space of 3 emails, and they said, this is weird. And so, they all thought it was quite interesting, and I did, of course, make sure that any response that I was giving them was right. But the point they're making with that is we have made it a crutch, so you still need the human 100% at the moment. I hope in the future that there are protections in place and more ethical understandings of this sort of avenue, but we're not there yet. Not way in any way, shape, or form.
What would you say are the main ways in which AI is currently helpful? If there's a marketer listening to this podcast and they're thinking about, okay, I mean, we know that some of the big platforms are building in AI. So my students tend to use Adobe Express, for example, and AI is now built into Adobe Express. You can make images, you can amend images, you can do that kind of thing. But is there anything in particular you think that marketers need to be doing more of using AI as it currently stands?
When AI started becoming popular, and I'm talking ChatGPT 13 months ago, 15 months ago, where it really started becoming commercialized, I, as an agency myself, said, either this is the end of all marketing or this is the dawn of something new. That was where my mind went. And so what I was trying to do at that point is think, well, how could this benefit me as an agency? As a marketer, how can this actually benefit me? And so I started quite quickly depending on AI to see what I could do. As a result of that, what I have started to do is myself is I've started to use AI as a support mechanism for analyzing data, for structuring things better, for answering questions that I don't always know the answers to. I've started seeing that, for example, I work with a lot of freelancers that are using AI as a method to fast track their marketing. So, for example, instead of saying, well, one of the things that I spoke to a student about the other day, which I thought was really interesting, was she said, well, how do I send a quote? I said, what do you mean, how do you send a quote? She said, well, I really want to send a quote to this client, but I don't know how to send it. And all the information online is so complicated. And I said, well, and then in the back of my mind, I said, well, I've been writing quotes for 7 years. And I thought that's such an easy thing to do, but she didn't. So she referred to AI as hey, can you help me? And what we're starting to see, which is quite interesting, is that AI has become a support mechanism, especially in the world of marketing, for automation, for fast tracking, for structuring, for simplifying elements that we may understand, but not everybody does. And so I think it can help you in a lot of ways. Just don't depend on it.
No, I think that's really interesting. And, I think it's useful for marketeers, and as you said, also for students and for all of us, just to all the stars that are used as ChatGPT in particular, or generative AI, but for, a starting point to help, gather your thoughts, to help get some ideas, initial ideas. And I've spoken to quite a few businesses who use it for sort of content creation, but just, again, the starting point, not relying on it, copy pasting it. And Tom, I guess that's similar to what we say to our students as well. James, is there anything, if we take a bit of a future outlook, that you can see, I mean, maybe away from the ethical implications now, but is there anything you can see AI evolving even further? Or anything you would say, you see on the horizon that might be happening where, especially with regards to marketing discipline, can be even more useful? Sort of any developments in AI or future predictions?
I believe that what we will start to see is very, very precise tools being created. And these will have massive implications on engagement and measurement more than anything. For example, okay, if we go back in time and we look at the introduction to search engines, we look at now search engines as the big ones, like, for example, Google, you've even got DuckDuckGo, Yandex, depending on what country you're in, and so forth. But at one time, there were multiple search engines, multiple out there, and they've now thinned out. What I see that's happening at the moment is that there are software companies and developers and engineers where we're riding the wave of AI, where programs are being developed that answer maybe one question or two questions that are helping us, but they're flawed in certain elements and areas. So I believe that AI will only get smarter. It's inevitable. It's, as Stephen Hawking actually quoted in a book quite recently, the short answers to big questions. He actually stated that you are going to just see this get smarter and smarter and smarter. So as a result of that, we will start to see programs and software become smarter and smarter. And I think it will help more than anything fast track the development of startups. When a startup is coming around, I did this survey with students when I was working in a university in Worcestershire. And most of them, when we were talking about this, said, well, you need around £5,000 to £10,000 to start a business. I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, you need a logo, you need a website, you need to do your strategy, you need to do your development, you need to get, your business plan in place. And all of these costs were coming to mind. I did that exact same survey with a university down south quite recently, and they said, well, you don't need anything. There are programs out there that are entirely free to get a business going immediately. And in theory, there are. You've got Canva that's free. You've got, Google's now offering programs that are free. You've got ChatGPT versions that are free. Everything. There is an element that is free. Yes, I will admit they're not perfect. No AI program is just yet. So what we're starting to see now is that these programs are going to become more precise and more beneficial to us.
Have you got any thoughts on how your own business might evolve throughout your career? Because you're still relatively young. You've got most of your career still to go. So any thoughts on where your career might take you, bearing in mind that AI is probably going to be a part of that career?
Have I think like most marketeers and people in this industry, there has been this thought on their mind to say and again, this wouldn't just be marketeers, actually. Let me rephrase that. There could be multiple industries that are thinking, is AI going to wipe out my industry? Is it going to replace me altogether? And if you haven't had that thought, you may be living under a rock, and that's fair enough. But I've had that thought multiple times, and it'd be silly not to. At Hot Source, what we've started doing is implementing as many systems as we can to trial and test this so that we can help apply this to our clients, to know what is good, what is bad, and what is an absolute waste of time. But one of the biggest things we're doing at the moment is automation. We are using AI a lot at the moment for automation and saving time. And, for example, I analyzed pre-COVID that nearly 30 to 40% of my entire operating time was spent in meetings. Well, as we saw post-COVID, meetings went online. They were forced to. You had no choice. So your meetings became allocated to 40 minutes because we were all using Zoom at one point. So you had no more than 40 minutes. You had to get it done. Okay. And what I noticed was that post-COVID, my optimization time was skyrocketed because I was no longer meeting people face to face. And so, again, what I've noticed post-COVID is that people email more than ever before. My inbox is flooded every day. Every day I come back to it, every day I clean it, every day it's full again. But AI systems now are helping us automate that, make it more simple, make it more streamlined, make it more easily to process. So I believe that, what we're trying to do at the moment with Hot Source is look at AI into ways that are going to make our life easier and also take out some of the guesswork. So for example, we've been using AI to assist with data analysis. We've been using AI for content creation. We've been even using AI to enhance customer engagement and relationships. And people that are saying or not using AI, you're just starting to be left behind. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to work out what the benefit is and also what's going to help me grow in the future, because we are becoming such an accelerated generation and AI will only get smarter. So it's my opinion, it's a good idea to jump on that and understand how to use it because it could benefit you.
No, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting to, talk about sort of future-proofing your business, but also just making sure that you stay relevant for your clients. And this is really interesting from a practitioner point of view. Now, I know that's also something you're interested in from a, academic, theoretical point of view and as part of your PhD. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of your take on this from a theoretical basis, sort of what you're looking at in your PhD or what you're fascinated by when it comes to the theory?
Absolutely. One of the things that brought me to the point of wanting to apply for a PhD was a principle that I've started to coin, and it's very much a name in its works, but what I call the digital gap. And something that I started to see in real life, was the development of artificial intelligence systems becoming so powerful that businesses and consumers were being left behind. And what I believe is starting to happen, and I've seen this in real time because I've been working with clients that it's happening, is that I believe we will get to a point where these AI systems are so powerful that businesses cannot keep up. And so as a result of that, what I believe we need to do, and this is where my sort of thesis and my focus will be, is understanding in 3 principles: assessing where we are currently as a market, assessing how ready we are to implement it, and where we can go in the future. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand, is there a sort of a sliding scale here? Is there sort of a sand timer that we're not seeing at the moment? And we saw this happen. For example, I was working with a council group in the heart of COVID. And I said to these guys, if you do not tell these businesses and groups of businesses that you're working with to update to a digital level, when we go into lockdown, you'll be left behind. They said I was sparking sort of panic. As a result, 30% of their business group went under, and they have never, ever been able to recover. And I believe what we're going to start seeing is businesses suffer from that same element. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that we understand where the future could be going and preparing ourselves for it.
I also seen, as part of my research, come quite across the sort of call for transparency and explainability of AI, that there's meant to be sort of in order to create trust, but also in order to not leave, business or people behind, that there's a strong call for sort of making sure that AI developers, how AI is going to go in the future, that we need more, I think that is termed transparency and explainability. And I thought that was really, a core issue that you just addressed, that, some people might be left behind because it's just, lots of people, because it is just too complicated for us to really understand, what's happening in that AI box, basically.
Absolutely. And that's such an interesting analogy there, and the way you've described it, because it's so true. I, for example, have leads every now and again as a business, and I had one quite recently where a company called me up and they said to me, hey, we think that we need to probably be on Facebook for our business. And I thought, Facebook? You're about 10 years behind. Now, imagine that same principle with AI. There are companies out there that are already on the forefront of change, ready and adapting as we go on. But there are also very traditionalist companies that are not updating. And at the moment, we're riding the wave of AI and enjoying it. It's fun, it's interesting. But what will happen is, and I go back to that point, which is what I believe will happen is the gap will get too big, where we just will not be able to understand. Businesses can still sign up to Facebook today and be beneficial and use it and be powerful and grow exponentially. But we, in theory, with AI, have created the perfect monster. We've created a perfect program. What I don't think all businesses are ready for this yet. And I would like them to be, so that they can all grow and prosper as they deserve to.
Thanks very much, James. Well, I think we probably need to let you go. I know you've got a couple of busy days ahead of you, so we need to let you go and prepare for those. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join us today. It's been really, really, really interesting to get your views. There's a couple of tools you mentioned that people might want to pick up on, as well as your thoughts on the future for this area. I'm sure people will be interested to see your research as you publish it in the years to come. I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, actually, but obviously you run your agency, you're a PhD student, but also you lecture and run training courses in some of these topics. So there may well be people that want to get in touch with you to talk about some of those things in a bit more detail. How should they contact you? What's the best way to find you online?
The best way is to reach out to me on LinkedIn, which I'm happy to share my details on, or go to my website, which is hotsourcecreative.com.
Hot Sauce with an O rather than an A. So
yeah, that is correct. Yeah, absolutely.
And if I didn't say at the beginning, it's James Vincent if you're looking for him on LinkedIn. So brilliant. Well, thanks very much for your time today. Obviously, I'll see you again soon. I'm sure you'll speak to Hanne in due course as well. Particularly, she's writing a book chapter on that topic at the moment.
Absolutely. James, just for me also, just thank you very much for being here. And everybody who's listening, try to subscribe and like our podcast. It's really nice to share these views.
It was lovely to meet you both, all right? And see you again soon, okay?
Thank you.